Hey y'all, welcome back to In the Kitchen with Baker Girl. Thank you, Jesus. It is a beautiful fall day to be in the kitchen. And in our second part series of Let's Chat About, we're going to be chatting about butter. Now, butter is a backbone staple of every good baker's kitchen. And the different types of butter that you use does matter in a recipe. Now, let's start off with our American butters. Now, this is a well-known brand, Land O'Lakes. And Land O'Lakes is one of the more top quality American butters that you can find in your local supermarket. Now, there is other brands. There's Breakstone, there's Challenge. There's different brands of butter, but my mother always preferred Land O'Lakes, so quite naturally I do too. Although I like many different brands of butter, but this is the one that you'll find that's more common in just about every American grocery store you'll find. Now this is unsalted, and all of my butters are always unsalted. The reason why, number one, most of my recipes I already have my salt calculated in. And if my butter already has salt in it, that kind of throw my recipe balance off. Now, if you're just putting a stick of butter in, say some soup or something, it doesn't really matter that much whether it has salt enough, because whether it's salted or not, because it might not affect your recipe. But if you're baking and, say you're making cookies and it calls for a teaspoon of salt and your butter already has salt in it, which by the way, each stick of salted butter usually contains about 1/4 teaspoon of salt. But that can vary. That can vary between the brands. One brand could use more, another brand of butter could use less. So to be safe, I always buy unsalted butter. So it takes all the guesswork out of how much salt I should be using. And I can stick with the original amount of salt in my original recipe. Now, this is an American butter. What makes this an American butter is all butters in America, to be classified as butter, have to have 80% butter fat, and that is at least 80% butter fat. If you go below 80%, it can no longer be classified as butter, and then you have to call it margarine or baking spread or something like that, and they're usually right around 60% butter fat. I know some margarines have like 40% butter fat, and you really, let's stick with good butter, which has, we know, at least 80% butter fat. Now, I have the Land O'Lakes brand, which is a national brand, costs a little bit more at your grocery store. And then here I have a store brand butter. Now, my Land O'Lakes I would use for my pies, my cookies, anything that you want a good quality butter, I would use my Land O'Lakes for that. Now, because I was raised by a mother who was very good at bargaining, and I try to be a good bargainer too. Now, I would not use my Land O'Lakes butter if I was, putting a cup, like if I was melting a tablespoon of butter to, scramble some eggs or something, unless just, you can afford that. If you can, that's great. But a good store brand unsalted butter is perfect for that, because I'm not worried about, it's just a tablespoon of butter that I'm scrambling some eggs in. I'm not worried about, the qualities and the butter fats and the richness and the creaminess. I just want some butter to scramble my eggs. So that is where keeping a good store brand butter comes in. It saves you money and it makes sense because you're not using your higher quality butter in scrambled eggs. So let's talk about European butters. Now, over here to my right, I have 2 examples of European butter. Now, what makes a European butter different from an American butter is that European butters have to be at least 82% butter fat. Now, that's 2% higher than our American butter, which is 80% butter fat. Now, this is an American European style butter, and this is an Irish European butter. Now, both of these are cultured butters, and that does matter because most American butters are not cultured. For instance, this is not a cultured butter. The culturing, it's the same thing that similar to buttermilk, which is cultured milk. Yogurt, which is another cultured milk. The butter, the milk in the butter has allowed to cultures. And most of the time a culture is added, as in the case with these two butters. They both have added cultures in them. Now, this is the butters that I would suggest that you use if you are making something like croissants, brioche, anything, a good pie crust, anything where the fat, the higher amount of fat does matter. Can you use the American butter? Absolutely, you can. But you'll see if you try these European style butters, it will make a huge difference in your finished product because it's just so much more buttery and so much creamier than your American style butter, just because it has more fat in it. So that's the European style butter. Now, I want to talk about something that most people don't think of, but that is a dairy-free butter. Now, this is made by Country Crock, and it's dairy-free, and it's also entirely plant-based. It's not made from milk, animal products whatsoever. It's plant-based. And this is a 79% fat content butter. So it's a little lower than American butters. You can still call it butter though, because it's not dependent on animal fat. So that's how this one can get away with being called butter, even though it's 79% fat versus our American butter from cow's milk, which is 80%, or our European butters, which are 82%. Now, because this is plant-based, there are various different types of oils that they use to produce it. It's not like margarine, but it's made, the companies would probably get angry. And by the way, this video is not sponsored by any of these companies, so I am free to give my thoughts and opinions on them. But I like this Country Crock plant-based butter. It holds up well. It makes a very good vegan buttercream. The only problem is it gets soft very quickly because it's made out of different types of oils. For instance, there is palm oil, there's canola oil, there's some pea protein, and there is soy lecithin in here. So if you're allergic to any of those ingredients, you probably want to avoid this. And it's just a different blend of plant-based oils, and the ingredients is listed on the back. And as I say, this is unsalted, which is great because you don't really notice the difference. I've baked with this butter this plant-based butter many times. Like I say, I use it for my vegan buttercream. I use it for my vegan pie crust. Anytime where you don't want dairy or you can't use dairy, this is your perfect substitute for butter because it acts just like butter. Now, the only difference with this is it softens really quickly. So I would use this for any type of, say, pie crust, croissants, anything where you need a butter. I would use this straight from the freezer, not from the fridge, because it gets softer really quickly. And also, if you're making a pie crust, you probably want to pop it back in the freezer several times to make sure that it stays nice and cold, because it will start to soften really quickly. If you're using it for buttercream, I would say take it out of the fridge or the freezer, maybe 30 minutes before you will need it to soften, because it does come to room temperature very quickly. Now, all of these butters, be it the plant-based butter, the American style butters, or the European style butters, all of these butters can be used interchangeably for either of them. However, like I say, if you want a really nice rich pie crust or really buttery, like a buttery cookie, or if you're making, something like puff pastry or something of that nature, you definitely want to stick with your European butters. And another good reason why I reserve these more expensive butters is because it's more of a treat. For instance, you wouldn't want to just buy, and these butters run around $5 for 2 sticks of butter versus our American butters, which can run between $5 to $7 for 4 sticks of butter. So the European butter does cost a lot more. And that's just because the quality is a lot more, because there's more butter fat in it and it's a little bit richer. So it's going to cost you a little bit more. Now, it's a good idea to keep, if you can, a selection of butters, keep them in your freezer. So keep some European butter for, if, company is coming, maybe your mother-in-law is coming over for dinner, or your in-laws in general, or you want to treat your family. It's a good idea to keep some of these in the freezer so you can make a really good, rich pie or cookie or pastry or brioche. Oh my goodness, these would be so good in brioche and croissants. The flavor is just absolutely it's so buttery. You really, really just want to eat it with nothing else. And to me, that's a good test of a good pastry. Can I eat it by itself without any adornments? And what I mean by that is, can I eat a plain donut without any, sprinkles or anything added to it, no glazes? Can I slice a piece of brioche and just toast it and enjoy it on its own? No butter, no jams, none of that. Is the pie crust. When you get the back end of the pie crust, take a bite of it. Does it taste good by itself? If it tastes good by itself, then that is good top quality baking. And butter does help with the flavors. Now, I'm not talking about margarine today because, well, number one, margarine is not butter. And number two, margarine has a lot of different added blended ingredients that helps it mimic butter. Let's just stick with good old fashioned butter. And the ingredients really couldn't be more simple. It says sweet cream and natural flavorings. There's nothing more in here than that. Same thing with our European butters: sweet cream, sea salt, and cultures, because like I said, the European butters are always going to be cultured. And even though the plant-based butter has other ingredients added, these are not anything that's, there are no trans fats in any of these. So just stick with good plain butter, especially if you're a beginner. Now, how to store butter? As a baker, I always keep a stash of butter in the freezer, and that's the best place to store butter. The doorway with the little butter tub up there we all have is really, that's fine for maybe 1 stick. But for any type of storage, I keep all of my butters in the freezer. And butter is good for up to 6 months. If it's in your freezer for a year and you find a box of butter in your freezer, don't throw it out. By all means, use it. There's nothing wrong with it. It'll be perfectly fine. The flavor may have started to, diminish a little bit. And then sometimes butter does pick up flavors from other things in your freezer. So if you will store your butter for long-term storage, and you have, a little bit of everything in your freezer, you may want to put your butter in a Ziploc bag and just take the whole container, put it in a Ziploc bag, close it up, and put it in the freezer. That way it doesn't pick up any freezer smells, if it's going to be stored longer than 6 months. So I hope that you have found this episode on butter, the different types of butters, how to use them, what's the best way to use them, and as what I'm always thinking of was, what's the best bargain for your butter. So for your all-purpose baking, all-purpose American baking, pies, cookies, cakes, whatever, you can always feel free to use an American butter. For just general cooking, whether I'm making stews, gravy, soups, whatever, a good store brand unsalted butter is perfect. That helps you save money. And then for those special ingredients, when you really want the butter to sing out and shine out in the ingredient, always reach for a European style butter, which has a higher butter fat content. And for those of you who are dairy-free or who prefer dairy-free, or perhaps you can't have dairy, a good plant-based butter is a good thing to keep stashed in your freezer as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope you subscribe to this channel if you haven't already subscribed, because next week we're going to be chatting about another ingredient that we all have at some point in time in our kitchen. You may not reach for it every day unless you're a baker like me, but it's a good thing to have in your kitchen, and I'm just gonna give you a little hint. It makes all our lives a little bit sweeter. So until next time, guys, I'll see you in the next episode of our Let's Chat About series. Good Lord willing. Take care, y'all. Bye.